A number of prominent Roman Catholics believe that modernity itself was at war with the tradition of the West's religious humanism. So they entered public discourse with the intention of reviving it. Jacques Maritain, for example, is thought by many to be the philosophical leader of 20th century Christian humanism. But Dawson is rightly understood to be the historical leader of the movement to revive a Catholic Christian humanism. There are others: Romano Guardini, E.I. Watkin, Etienne Gilson, J.R.R. Tolkien, many, many more. And these found powerful allies among Anglo-Catholic humanists like C.S. Lewis and T.S. Eliot, and a very young Russell Kirk at the time. If you look at this collective body of writing these individuals produced, you will see a preoccupation with decadence and the decline of the West. But one reason they devoted so much attention to decline was to diagnose the cultural and intellectual ailments of modernity and to show readers that there was a cure for the decline. They're not just indulging in the woe is us, woe is me. There is a cure for it. So they strove to recover Christian humanism as a moral, intellectual, and cultural force in the West. They set out to revive that tradition, not by naively attempting to turn back the clock, but by applying timeless Christian humanistic principles to the diagnosis, the problem, and the cures of their era. In Dawson, for example, you'll find excellent statements of what Christian humanism means and how it could revive intellectual and cultural life in the West in such works as The Crisis of Western Education and The Christian Humanist Tradition. I don't think one can fully appreciate Dawson's contribution to the discipline of history and to 20th century intellectual life if one fails to see him in the long line of Christian humanist thinkers. It goes all the way back to the 2nd century. Now, I told you I'd tell you 8 things briefly that I think are principles of Dawson's thought, and I'd like to go into those and show you that he is a sign of contradiction. First, and this is most basic, Dawson insists that we understand the relationship between religion and culture. Religion, he argues, is what puts the cult in culture. The word comes, of course, from the Latin cultus, which means not just cultivation, but worship. To Dawson, this was revealing. It suggests that worship of a common deity lies at the root of all higher cultures. Religion and the moral code it provides are also the basis of common action, social action. For only when a people have a common notion of right and wrong, only when they share a moral code, can they rise above the might makes right mentality or ethos that is the law of the jungle that characterized much thought from Nietzsche forward. Only with a common moral vision is there a possibility that they will cooperate on a scale large enough to overcome the challenges of nature, including their own human nature. Hence, the truth of any particular religion aside, there is a utilitarian value to a people being religious, united in the worship of a deity. Second, Dawson defines what it means for us in the West that Judaism and Christianity form the foundation of our civilization, what we once called Christendom. It means that we have evolved in a certain way of thinking, different from that of the Chinese, Indians, and ancient Greeks and Romans. It means that we possess a linear conception of time with a beginning, middle, and end, and along with its corollary, the possibility of progress. It means we believe that each person has been created in the image of God, traditionally. This is what we have believed, and thus has an inestimable dignity as well as inalienable rights. It means we seek to establish dominion over nature. It means we are restless to spread the good news about our life and destiny and civilization to parts unknown. These are some of the ideas and characteristics that historically have defined us as Westerners, and they ultimately come from our religion. As Dawson put it, quote, "To live for eternal truths while facing every practical responsibility and meeting the demands of the present moment on their own ground, that is the spirit by which a Christian culture lives and is known. For Christian culture involves a ceaseless effort to widen the frontiers of the kingdom of God, not only horizontally, by increasing the number of Christians, but vertically by penetrating deeper into human life and bringing every human activity into closer relation with its spiritual core." Close quote. Third, it follows from the previous 2 points, the more a culture drifts from its religious roots, the more likely it is to encounter serious problems. In fact, Dawson defined the modern problem, which is also a postmodern problem, largely in terms of secularization. He explained, quote, "The secularization of Western Christendom involved first the loss of Christian unity." Think Martin Luther. Involved first the loss of Christian unity, which was itself due not to secularization, but to the violence of religious passion and the conflict of rival doctrines. Second, it involved the abdication of Christians. I think he's saying here primarily Catholics, fellow Catholics, of their responsibilities in certain fields of social activity, and he especially condemned Catholic educators who had abdicated their role as specifically, self-consciously Catholic educators. They became secular educators with a crucifix on the wall. We may say that 19th century England was still a Christian society, but a Christian society that had diverted its energies to the pursuit of wealth. And finally, this problem of modernity involved a loss of belief, which was to a certain extent inevitable since the stability of faith had already been undermined by the 2 previous processes. By the Reformation, Luther, Calvin, and by the Christians left over in the core of Christendom who had a failure of nerve about teaching what they believed. Dawson's words here. To state the problem in a simplified form, if one century destroyed the unity of Christendom by religious divisions, and a second century confined the Christian way of life to the sphere of the individual conduct and allowed the outer world of society and politics to drift its own way, then a third century finds that the average man accepts the external social world as the objective standard of reality and regards the inner world of faith and religion as subjective, illusory, and ultimately unreal. Close quote. And this is the essence of the modern problem. It's the same thing Solzhenitsyn, since he's been in the news recently, it's the same thing Solzhenitsyn tried to drive home when he said, quote, "Men have forgotten God." That was the source of our problems. Dawson indicted secularization and the decline of the family in social pathologies, totalitarian ideologies, intellectual confusion, and moral dissipation. Fourth, Dawson argues that the exit strategy, the way out of the modern problem, involves nothing short of the re-Christianization of Western culture. Not from the top down, but from the bottom up. Salvation will not be found in a state religion. He's not urging the West to return to a theocracy or to an ecclesiocracy. He pointed at the Roman Empire to illustrate. It was not the decrees of Constantine, but the blood of the martyrs that established Christianity as a social and moral force. Bottom up, not top down. Dawson conceded that the return from a secular civilization to a Christian way of life involves a reversal of many historical forces that transcend not only the limits of our personal experience, but even of our own particular society. And yet, history ultimately is not so much about these large impersonal forces, but about the thousands upon thousands of decisions made by individual human beings, the human person exercising his or her free will. It is the individual mind that is the creative force which determines the ultimate fate of a culture. And the first step in the transformation of culture is a change in the pattern of culture within the mind, within the heart. This explains the importance of education, of catechesis, and moral formation in all of Dawson's thought, especially his later thought. He hit this hard, this point.